Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. Bishops and rooks are natural enemies. One moves diagonally, the other orthogonally. This means that when a bishop attacks a rook, or a rook attacks a bishop, the defending piece cannot directly attack back. Historically, the rook represents a chariot on the battlefield, so it moves quickly along the straights, but cannot easily turn and can get blocked in. In practice, because of how the other pieces move, it also means that bishops are often more powerful earlier in the game, while rooks are more commanding later in the game when there are fewer pieces. This means that in the earlier part of the game, bishops are potential rook assassins, as we shall see in this game of the Ruy Lopez. Please enjoy! Let's start by having a look at the review. So chess.com's algorithm, I played relatively well, about 82%, and the opponent about 80%. And as we can see, quite balanced at the earlier part of the game, with the opponent with a slight advantage. And yet at the end, I managed to clinch the win, and basically the result of a blunder by the opponent. Let's now move to the analysis so we can see this in context. In this game, I had the black pieces and the opponent white, and they led with e4. So I played e5, knight f3, knight c6, very normal, and bishop b5. So the Ruy Lopez opening. Now against the Ruy Lopez, I've found myself generally playing the second knight, so knight f6, which is also known as the Berlin defense. And apparently this is quite a solid response to the Ruy Lopez. Now the opponent straight up captures the knight, which is actually the transformation I like. So capture back the bishop with pawn, opening up the file, the d file for the queen. Opponent plays d3, which is good. Now of course this pawn is potentially hanging. So what I opted to do is to pin the knight with my bishop, so bishop g4. So playing fairly aggressively, looking at trading pieces quickly and early. They play h3, asking what I'm going to do. So I captured the knight, which was my whole intention of putting the piece there. They capture back with the queen, which is okay. I develop bishop d6 with the potential of castling. Opponent now plays a bishop at g5. So potentially pinning to the queen, and also, of course, there is a second attacker. Though, you know, that doesn't exactly work, given that it is defended by a pawn. You don't want to trade a piece for a pawn. However, that would sort of really make my pawn structure here a little bit ugly. So what did I choose to do here? Now, I think Stockfish thinks that bringing the bishop back to unpin the knight is the best move. However, I opted instead to ask whether or not they're going to commit. Are they going to capture my knight? They do. I opt to capture back with queen, asking do they want to do a queen trade? They do, and I capture here with pawn. So yes, I've sort of damaged my pawn structure, but I've got the opportunity now to castle queenside and then potentially place the rook on the now the semi-open g-file. So I was pretty happy with that. Now the position here does favor white. So plus 1.7 roughly, but I thought I was okay here. I thought it was okay here. They had a knight, I had a duck square bishop. I thought I was okay. They play knight d2. I now long castles. They short castles, so you know, very potentially spicy. So I place my rook now on that semi-open g-file, so rook hg8. They play knight f3. So these are the sort of potential positions of the knight. So I place my pawn here, so c5, so at least blocking that square. Opponent plays c4, which is fine, I suppose. I now play a6. And the idea here is potentially, you know, having attack. Opponent plays knight h4, which is potentially a fairly annoying move because there's no particular way I can actually prevent the knight from going there. And, you know, if he goes there, then there's a sort of a fork of the bishop and the pawn. So I thought here what I would do was to prophylactically bring the bishop back to f8, guarding that pawn, making that move somewhat moot, because once the knight is in that position, can't go there because it'll be defended, doesn't make sense to go there, doesn't make sense to go there, doesn't make sense to go there, doesn't make sense to go there. So bishop f8, and I was gratified to see on analysis that that was in fact the best move. They make that move anyway, so knight f5, and you'll notice that their advantage goes down because it isn't really really anywhere for the knight to go. Not to mention they've straight out hung that pawn. So captures. They bring the knight back, knight e3, which is fine, I guess, because none of these squares are a potential problem for me, really. Here, my thought was that, I knew that that was potentially not the best move, and you can see that was apparently a better move that puts me into an advantage, but still, still a bit of an advantage. So back to equality, basically committing them to do something about that pawn. I was potentially, if they make the wrong move, then I would have sort of a potential attack on the pawn on g2. Though, of course, I don't really because it's still defended. The opponent now moves the pawn to b3. So, that rook doesn't really have an attack now. So here I bring it back to a d4, particularly with attack on that pawn. Logically, they will now move there, which is what they did. Here, I decided to play h5 because what I saw was that I had this attack on the knight, and this actually brings my bishop back into the game. At the moment, it's fairly passive, not doing very much. The opponent now plays a rook fd1 with an attack on the rook, and here I thought about just taking the rook, but then I thought, look, it's not a real problem. If they capture, I basically get an opportunity to undouble the pawns on the c file. That seems okay. So instead, I played bishop h6. So Stockfish didn't really like this move, but what I saw was that if the opponent didn't play carefully, so I thought this was probably the best move for them, sort of a fork of those two pieces. But I wondered whether or not they would actually see that move. Because if they don't make that move, then, and they in fact get a little bit greedy, it captures, then I've got here as a fork with check, winning both the knight and the rook, and that would be a winning position for me, I thought. Now, the opponent thought for quite a long time, I think almost a minute, a little bit over a minute, and then made a blunder. They decided to capture instead, and you can see almost minus 10, minus 9.5, and here, the stunning move. So bishop, fork, captured the knight, a fork between a king and rook. So king must move out of the way. Capture now the rook. And, now with another attack on the other rook. And here my opponent made another mistake, missing the fact that the rook was now on the same diagonal as the bishop. Of course, they weren't prior to that. And of course, captured again. Rook bishop versus just pawns, definitely winning, and the opponent must have, I think, slapped their forehead here and chose to resign. So a bit of a mistake at the end after one blunder, but good game, GG. Both my opponent and I were quite equal throughout the opening and earlier part of the middle game. Unfortunately, my opponent missed a bishop fork against their king and rook, and then frazzled by the loss, didn't see that their other rook was also on the diagonal now controlled by the bishop. In 3 moves, my bishop captured 13 points of material, pretty much ending the match. I hope you found this video interesting, and thanks for watching.